Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. This is your host, Jessica Van. I'm the founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group. And today I am joined by Karima Thomson. Hello, Karima.
Hi, Jessica.
So nice to have you with us.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
And where are you here from today?
From the office in Abu Dhabi.
Yes, great. Which is going to be sort of a central theme in our conversation today around just different perspectives and interpretations and understandings of the executive assistant role across geo-diverse spaces and countries. So Karima has straddled a lot of different countries, both in her upbringing and her education and her work history. So she'll be helping to share some of those perspectives with us today on our show. By way of background, so Karima is joining us, as she mentioned, from Abu Dhabi. She currently supports I want to make sure I get it correctly, the CEO of Core 42.
Yes.
Which is part of a collection of companies under the G42 umbrella. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, great. And Core 42 is working in the AI space, which we will hear more about. Prior to her current role, Karima was an EA for the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, having been born and raised in Scotland and later working in London and now in the Middle East as an executive support professional. Karima has navigated the very dynamic landscape of what the EA profession looks like across borders. And that was, as I alluded to, some of what we're going to get into today in our episode. We'll explore the perception of the executive assistant role in UAE companies, as well as global hubs like the US and Europe. And we'll be discussing the unique expectations and some of the cultural nuances that shape this relationship between EAs and executives in the UAE. So that is a lot to tackle. I was saying before you joined, I said, no big deal. We're just going to tackle relations between the US, the Middle East, global perspectives on the executive assistant profession, and cultural nuances all in 30 minutes. So that's the digest. But in any case, we better get started. So with no further ado, in your opinion, how does the perception of the EA profession in the UAE compare to how it's perceived in the US or Europe or other global metropolises?
So yeah, it definitely does vary. I think internationally now, the EA, a good EA, is recognized as being the backbone of our executive, a strategic advisor even, more operational, but there are nuances, obviously, in the regions across internationally. So in London, when I was in London at MTV, it felt a lot more collaborative and open door policy, more informal, fast-paced dynamic. When I moved here to the Middle East at ADIA, it was equally fast-paced, but much more structured, much more hierarchical. There's a lot more emphasis on authority, seniority, especially when it comes to decision-making, and respect, diplomacy, relationships. These are really, really paramount here in the Middle East. The UAE is evolving a lot in this kind of landscape, and especially now there's so much tech and finance out here. So I think now the role is evolving a lot more. It's less administrative and it's much more strategic, operational. It's becoming much more recognized as an executive role as opposed to like a secretarial role.
Mm-hmm. And prior to you leaving MTV to join ADIA, you referred to it. Is that correct?
Abu Dhabi Investment Authority.
Okay, great. Had you had any experience living in the Middle East?
I had a very short stint out in Muscat, Oman, where I did a very interesting role, working for a family conglomerate, and then decided that wasn't for me, and then made the shift out here. But that was only for a few months. So before that, I was fresh off the boat from London.
So how did you reconcile that? I mean, that must have been a really kind of shocking change to the system. And I mean, you mentioned there were a couple of things that you encountered around just there's a bigger priority around respecting authority and the way that you address people and things of that nature. How was that to go from Western extreme, like a London, which is just, a little bit of everything and quite liberal and quite conservative in some ways, but also quite liberal in other ways and quite dynamic and diverse to coming to a place like the UAE?
I mean, it took a lot of time to get used to these cultural nuances. And I think that's one of the big things here. You've got to respect the culture, be culturally aware, and that takes time. It was a little uncomfortable at first. However, the UAE is so progressive, it's so modern, there's a huge
Mm-hmm.
cosmopolitan of nationalities out here.
Mm-hmm.
So quickly build like a circle. You get to, you get to know you're thrown in it. I guess I was thrown in the deep end, which is the best way to kind of familiarize
Mm-hmm.
with that. It was a bit of a cultural shock, but I got used to it pretty quick, just with the network of people that I have around me and the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think are some of the misconceptions that people tend to have or think of or label the EA role in the Middle East that you would like to address for us today?
I suppose there has been a misconception about women out here in terms of like supporting leadership or leadership roles themselves. Um, they tend to think that you maybe have a limited growth because of the kind of preference to males, but that, in my experience, that's been the complete opposite. I'd say, I mean, I think a lot of it depends, like anywhere, on the organization that you work in, the
Mm-hmm.
executive that you work for. So I'm lucky enough to work for a fantastic executive who really, has pushed me into having more responsibility, more visibility, and working with the leadership team. I'd say I've really adapted and been challenged much, much more than I ever was back in the UK in that sense.
Yeah. Well, and I did notice, I mean, it looks like and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but it looks like the executive that you support maybe grew up in Bulgaria or is Bulgarian and then spent part of his professional career in Silicon Valley,
That's right.
which is of course our hub. And
Senorita.
so, right. And then, like to your point, it really does seem like the UAE and Abu Dhabi, where you are based in particular, is a real melting pot of perspectives, nationalities, cultures. I mean, that's quite evident just looking at your leadership team and even your investors in the Core 42. I mean, I think all of these things are somewhat indicative of the company more broadly and how it conducts itself. It doesn't seem like it's any one thing. It's very much a melting pot. Um, that's nice to hear that that's been your experience as well in working for this particular leader.
Definitely, definitely. And even just to add to that, in addition to the organization, I think as well, I mean, Abu Dhabi now is becoming renowned as quite, or the UAE is becoming renowned as a global hub. There's just,
Hmm.
it's progressing so quickly and it's as fast paced and dynamic as London, New York. It's really
Hmm.
that level.
I do think that there's a lot of misunderstanding among Americans when we think about the Middle East. And I think that oftentimes people tend to extrapolate certain um, politics or ways of existing and to the entire Middle East and not recognize that there's also geo nuance, So like for instance, the experience of a woman in Saudi Arabia is not the same as the experience of a woman in, the United Arab Emirates or Abu Dhabi or wherever. Could you maybe comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I have quite a number of American friends here as well, and a lot of them were surprised when they first came here, or just a lot of people in general. They're surprised at how tolerant it is, how open-minded it is, how accepting it is of everyone,
Hmm.
including different faiths as well. So
Hmm.
it's not at all what a lot of people who haven't visited the Middle East envisage, which is why it attracts a huge amount of expats as well.
Hmm.
It's a very comfortable place to live, and actually a lot of us, myself included, will come here for like a couple of years and end up
Hmm.
here now 14 years. So had my children here, they've been born and raised here, so
Mm. Yes, that's great. mean, you mentioned that there was kind of a formality difference or differential between the role here where you are versus Europe. But have you seen actual functional differences in terms of the types of things that you touch and work on and are exposed to in your current environment?
No, I'd say it's changed. The landscape's changed for EAs so much, especially depending on which area you're in. And because I'm in tech, I
Hmm.
haven't experienced those differences. I
Hmm.
suppose when I worked in my previous role, the hierarchy was a bigger part of that. And
Hmm.
again, was very much the respect, diplomacy, trust element was, I mean, it's here everywhere, but it was really huge there. So it meant that you might not be able to turn things around as quickly as you'd
Hmm.
like. You have to go through layers and layers of approvals to get things done.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, quite process driven in that sense.
Hmm. What are some of the formalities, either social or otherwise, that you've seen a difference between? So, for instance, if you are planning an offsite for your executive in the UAE, or you're planning a social event or a dinner or a closing ceremony, right? Something to commemorate something significant. Are there any things that you would think about differently in terms of planning something like that versus if you were, I don't know, planning for something in New York, right? And I'm thinking, this could be a useful guidance, not just for people who actually conduct business and live in the UAE, but for people that, many of our American US based executive assistants find themselves operating progressively more and more in a very globally diverse perspective, right? So their executives are doing business across the world. They're going to places all over the world. They're having to meet with foreign leaders and dignitaries and businessmen and investors across every possible place you can imagine. So I think that might be something that could offer some insight to people that just find themselves suddenly having to think about something like that. Could you maybe share some observations that you've seen of what is makes for a successful social interaction or business meeting, something that might demonstrate more of the cultural nuance?
So I think in terms of the relationships, it's very important to have, again, because hierarchy is quite important here. It's important then to have, if a CEO is coming, then another CEO is coming, so you have things sort of levels of seniority
Mm-hmm.
represented
Mm-hmm.
either side. That tends to be important. Um, Obviously, if you were inviting local, executives, as in from the UAE, you'd be careful not to have it, let's say, in a bar or, it
Mm-hmm.
depends. Some
Mm-hmm.
are more tolerant than others, but it's something you'd have to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Not to have alcohol necessarily around. And just like maybe a suitably slightly more conservative setting, but it would very much depend on the people
Sure.
that you're having at that business meeting and the level of their seniority as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting how much social cues are embedded in, really kind of mundane things, but they can be so telling, I mean, we have clients who, depending on how you show up in an interview, if you show up, too formally, might feel like, oh gosh, this person doesn't get our culture, doesn't get our intrepid, founder mentality type of thing. And the opposite could be said for, for other companies that operate in a more formal way. So I think to your point, you really have to know who's present and really kind of extrapolate from there what's going to be appropriate in terms of the venue, the form of addressing, even just, the way that you communicate written in the style of invitation, the style of email communication or whatever it might be.
Yeah, the respect thing is huge. So even the way you address somebody, obviously if it's an excellency, a commander, brigadier, that sort of thing plays a huge part as well. Yeah, these things. And as you say, it's even the prep before the meeting and having your executive prepared as well for that meeting, because quite often you have to expect the unexped.
Hmm. Yeah, and I don't think that's obvious at all to most of us. When you said obviously His Excellency or Brigadier, that is not obvious to most Americans. Those are not words that we use or hear on a regular basis. So that would be a huge, calibration that would need to happen if
Yeah.
someone were, as you said, working with local people. So, as you mentioned, you're working in tech currently. And as we mentioned in the intro, you specifically working for an AI company. Any insights that you can share in how technology or artificial intelligence is influencing the EA role in the UAE? And do you see, I mean, I'm also a little bit, I'd like to know more about what Core 42 is doing within the AI space, because AI is obviously just this huge umbrella. But apart from that, do you see any ways in which AI is having an impact on your role?
Well, I think like many roles, it's definitely transforming the role to some extent. And I think rather than looking at it as replacing EAs, I think we should look at it as enhancing, because tools such as Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, these are revolutionizing how we work in terms of time efficiency, managing workflows, even meeting minutes and action items. That's a huge support for EAs. And I think as well, even data-driven insights, we can collate from these amazing AI tools. The great thing about having these automated tools in place is that it can give us more time to focus on the more strategic work, the more high impact work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this doesn't just apply to EAs, obviously it applies to so many across the board. I think for the future of the EA, it's not so much about the EA doing less. It's more about high value work. So an EA sort of having more time to become more of that business strategic partner, if you like.
What sorts of things have you been able to relegate to AI? I mean, you mentioned Microsoft Copilot.
Yeah, well, that's one of the main things. That the meeting minutes and action items. That it's a huge support in that sense. It captures so much more than you can either or writing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge help. And even in terms of diary management, that sort of thing. With Copilot, it can tell you the tasks for the day ahead, what you need to prioritize. It can help you find things super quickly. Instead of looking through your emails for something, you can ask Copilot. Will bring it up. It'll bring up a number of sources that all relate to one topic. So yeah, it's a fantastic tool. It's something we should all try to leverage more.
It's actually, not to give it away, but we'll be releasing our most current version of our compensation guide, which is something that we put out once a year. We'll be releasing it momentarily, actually, within the next couple of days. And we spent a good amount of our time in this particular version talking about the role of AI and executive support, and really came to the same conclusion that you have just now, which is that it's not really a replacement, it's more of a performance enhancement. And I do think it's sort of upping, if anything, it's upping the demand for skilled humans, right? Because I think that it's sort of, like you said, there's certain unskilled sorts of things that are going to be progressively more and more eaten up by AI and AI's capabilities. But I think that the priority around skilled humans who can actually interpret these things, parse through information, apply things, apply logic, all of these other things, it's really kind of, I think, exposing that there's still very much a need for that level of human skill.
Definitely, and I think especially in the EA role, where so much of it is about relationships and nuance. Each situation is different, and again here as well, the face to face, in person interactions are really important in the Middle East. So that's something these humans we do. But I think, yeah, as an EA, you need to be able to read people. I mean, that's part of being a good EA. You need to understand people and have an interest in them and have that empathy and things. So I think, in that sense, that's where AI cannot replace what we do at the moment.
Right. At the moment, she says.
At the moment.
So what does Core 42 do within the AI space?
So it's an iCloud and computing company.
Great. You mentioned previously when we were planning the content for today's recording that you've never really had what we would consider, solid work-life balance, right? And would you say that that's more a function of the different environments and industries and spaces that you've worked in, or would you say that there's a cultural pressure in the places that you've worked in, not even just your present place, but all of your prior places? I'm curious, or is that just a Karima thing? And you're just someone who doesn't really pursue or seek work-life balance. I don't know. But I'm curious if you can comment on that and if you've observed any differences in the priority around work-life balance when you reflect on the different countries that you've worked in.
So I think number one, it's very much a me thing. I find it hard to have a balance overall. Like I'm always on the go. And I've always been like that, pre-kids, during kids, while I'm having them, everything. So I think as well, it is difficult as a working mum in a high pressure role to have a work-life balance. I just don't, I think as women, we get told a lot of we can have it all. And I don't necessarily, in my opinion, I don't necessarily think we can. I think we can have a lot, but I think always going to be sacrifices, recalibrations. I think it'll either be more going to work or more going to the kids that you never quite feel you're giving enough to all. I think that's quite common amongst us as working women. Um, I think as well, obviously in the tech industry, it's very fast paced. It is 24/7. I think in the Middle East as well, in my experience, we do tend to be a bit more 24/7 here, surprisingly. Although family is very much respected, there is a kind of expectation that you're available all of the time. So that might differ from some environments back in the UK or US or Europe. In terms of work-life balance, again, as well, I mean, I think as I've got older, I think the key is more about alignment versus balance. I think as long as you're comfortable knowing why you're, as busy and working the way that you do and you're enjoying it, then it helps to not have that balance as such. And then another additional sort of thing that's affected me in terms of work-life balance is having the three children, but having one who's on the spectrum who has autism and ADHD. That has obviously created a lot more challenges in terms of just life in general and trying to support our son in addition to the girls plus the job plus the family,
Plus, and plus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think as women, our roles are highly, highly hyphenated. I'm reminded when you were saying that as women, you can't have it all. You can have a lot, but you can't have it all. And I'm reminded, I don't know if you know the comedian Ali Wong. She's pretty
Yes.
popular. She has a bit about career women, and she says basically something to the effect of, I'm just here to say that I'm a mom, or I'm a wife and I'm a career person, and it's not enough. It's not everything. We're told that it's everything, and it's not. I want more. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Yeah. Where does the UAE stand on things like, I'm just curious, like things like vacation time and things like that? I mean, obviously Europe is quite renowned for, at least by US standards, by comparison, it seems quite more favorable in terms of time to yourself, time for vacation, mat leave coverages, things like this. Where does the UAE stand in on those points?
So in terms of vacation, very generous. We get between 25 to 30 days,
Hmm.
and that's like working days. And then we get a lot of public holidays as well. So although we don't get Christmas per se,
Sure.
you can take that off. But no, in terms of vacation, I think they're very generous here. In
Hmm.
terms of maternity leave, it's quite short. Probably it's now 3 months. So it's the same, I think, as the US.
Hmm. And that's, I think, the higher end of what most states offer. Some states
Yeah.
in the US offer nothing at all. So, yeah, I
Well,
think the 3 months is the most generous that you'll get. So, you mentioned that you've grown by being someone who is comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I would say, just this bold move that you made taking this big risk, leaving your career in London, leaving MTV, which was obviously entertainment, and doing something very different, ultimately working for the investment authority. I'm curious if you can elaborate more on how you've evolved by being somebody who embraces unfamiliar things.
Yeah, I know I definitely have. And it's not been linear, I would say. It's been, yeah, a lot of discomfort, a lot of change, like most of us. But I think, I mean, it's helped me to adapt and evolve and rebuild. I've had to rebuild quite a lot as well. And moving to the Middle East, as you know, on my own, it was uncomfortable. And navigating new environment, new culture, and just understanding the expectations in a different work environment in a different country was enormous. But I think it's helped me a lot in terms of resilience, in terms of independence, being comfortable, as I said, being uncomfortable. A small example, when I first moved to the UAE, I used to drive in the UK, but I just did not feel comfortable driving here. I just felt out of my depth. And so for a couple of years, I was taking taxis. Which is not practical. And it almost became a bit of a phobia where I didn't want to drive. Now, I mean, for years and years, I've been driving a Jeep and driving in the desert and driving over dunes and basically dune bashing. I don't get uncomfortable doing it.
Right.
But it's kind of like there's a lot to be said, I think, for being a little bit uncomfortable because you definitely grow. The same in this role. This role that I'm in at Core 42 has been very challenging. As I mentioned, Carol has put me in much more visible positions than I've been used to historically.
Mm-hmm.
Even in this year, it's less than a year that I've been here, I feel that I've grown, so much because of being uncomfortable, basically. Growing, I mean, if you stick to what you know and the familiar, you don't evolve. So I think I'll continue to challenge myself and doing this podcast. Like I'm actually converted, so to put myself like in a video, I was thinking, oh my goodness, why didn't I choose audio? Because I'm not used to doing this sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, I do. I very much relate to that. And I also subscribe to that mode of living, where just constantly pushing for, and it could be something that seems relatively benign to somebody else, but to you, it's something, right? And I think that's that space, that edge between comfort and discomfort is where growth happens. It's where opportunity happens. It's where expansion happens. It sounds very trite, but I recently started teaching dance classes.
Wow.
Not taking dance classes, but being the teacher, which is a very different thing. And it has humbled me in such a way, and also like more so than putting my voice out to a global audience and doing podcasts and running my business and all the things that I do. That first class that I taught, I was more nervous than anything I've done professionally in years. So it just goes to show like it's kind of constantly finding those boundaries and those borders to kind of stick with our theme of border crossing. Yeah. Also, I should mention, I also live in a desert, but I live in a green desert. You live in they always say the difference between your desert and my desert, right? I live in the Sonoran Desert, which is known as a green desert. But I don't know if you're familiar with the Sonoran Desert, but
I'm not.
yeah, it's Arizona, Mexico is the Sonoran Desert.
Yes.
So we get the extreme heats that you guys get, but we don't have like quite the sand dunes that that you're describing when you're taking your Jeep and going off-roading or whatever. But that heat, but our desert is actually quite green, quite green. So it's kind of an interesting paradox.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, love to someday.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. For those who are maybe aspiring to walk in your footsteps, right? Do what you've done. Maybe they're US based currently, but they've always dreamed of working in London or taking that opportunity, whatever it might be, or even, going even more unfamiliar and doing what you did and going to the UAE or elsewhere. What advice would you have for setting yourself up for success, but also I think what do you need to shed, right? In terms of things that you need to be willing to forfeit, whether it's comforts, whether it's ideologies, whether it's expectations. Maybe it's even food and certain things that, that you're accustomed to eating or having. What do you need to be able to relinquish in order to set yourself up to be successful? And what advice do you have for that?
It's a good question. I think you need to think of yourself as being more than an assistant. So you need to, again, it's a confidence thing, and you need to try to position yourself, I think, as more of a strategic business partner in terms of just understanding what the company's goals are, looking at the bigger picture, and being, I'd say, proactive versus reactive. I think that's really important, especially when you're in a new environment, especially if it's a busy, dynamic, fast-paced environment and you're juggling many, many balls. It's very easy to become reactive, but being proactive in any environment, but especially in a new country, I think is helpful. Again, going back to what I mentioned before, you do need to understand the culture. You do need to familiarize yourself with etiquette, business etiquette, cultural awareness. Don't, I suppose, if you're an expat, don't only associate yourself with people from your own country, like try to mix with many, many different nationalities, because it just gives you that deeper knowledge and understanding. And yeah, everybody brings something to the table. I'd say, again, the relationship building, which I've just touched on, is paramount, like building relationships with many people, and not just in a professional sense, in a personal level as well. So you need to have your own network of people, because these people become very much like your family when you're away from home. What we touched on earlier is staying ahead of technology, just keeping up to date with, AI technology is obviously in this day and age super important for the EA role as well. And I guess just being open to trying different things, like you talked about food, like just having an open mind, trying not to be judgmental, and embracing the discomfort of new and unknown territory.
Mm-hmm. So we have a final question, which I'm sure you already know because you are a follower of our program. We like to ask everyone if they could support anyone in history, whether current or past, who would you choose to support and why?
So it was a difficult one. There's a lot of people I would like to support, as I think we all would. But one of the people I'd like to support is Mo Gaudat. He is a sort of thought leader. He's a writer. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I'm not.
He was the chief business officer at Google X for a significant number of years, and he was
Okay.
pivotal there in terms of what he did with like developing cutting technology and AI-driven innovations and things. So he's got a very deep understanding of AI, which obviously correlates with the environment that I'm in now. But he talks a lot about how AI is good for mankind, but also, the potential ethical challenges without scaremongering people. But I think what makes him truly remarkable to me, it's less about his innovative AI expertise. It's more to do with just his resilience and his ability to deal with adversity. He tragically lost his son Ali at a young age, and he wrote a book, Solve for Happy. It's written many books. One of them is Solve for Happy, and he's created like a global movement where he's trying to define what actually makes people happy in terms of like a formula. And it's very inspiring. He's sort of inspiring millions to rethink about what makes them happy and what is their purpose. And I guess how to deal with challenges, adversity, I mean, worst thing that could possibly happen.
Devastating loss, yeah.
And instead of, he's managed to turn that somehow to help others, which I just find really inspiring. Yeah, he's a very inspiring individual. You should try and listen to him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I absolutely will. Thank you for making us all aware if we, like me, weren't aware before prior. I really like that. I'm curious to know his approach to, like you said, solving for happy. Like, what is his approach to that?
Yeah, he's a
Yeah,
very individual, inspiring.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. That's a lovely takeaway. Well, I want to thank you for being on our program and for tackling, I think it's somewhat, this is definitely a new topic for us. And thank you for representing a somewhat sensitive in certain ways, topic and kind of debunking some of the stereotypes and some of the kind of cultural ideologies that we tend to associate. So thank you for championing that and also just sharing your experience and your very global and interesting life and career. Thank you for and thank you for pushing the boundaries on your comfort by joining us today.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan and I really am honored to be on this podcast. I think it's wonderful what you do and how you put the spotlight on this role, the executive assistant or chief of staff roles, which, they're just so invaluable. It's wonderful to have somebody shine that light on us like this.
Thank you. Yeah, they truly are. You truly are. By the way, do your children think you're the coolest since you used to work for MTV?
They're too young to
They're
even.
too young to know how cool that is. Oh no.
No.
Oh, it's such a waste. That's such a waste. Yeah. I often think about how innovative MTV was in, really creating this whole concept of like reality television that we have just every single permutation of now, right? But they really were, I feel like, the innovators of that category. So
Definitely,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Paved the way forward for many.
Yeah, well, we who were born before 1980 definitely know how cool that is. So good job, Karima. All right. Well, it was lovely to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jessica. Lovely to meet you. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, we're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.